Your cat is sitting 3 feet away from you right now, and it has no idea it owes you anything. No gratitude, no obedience, no sense that you are in charge. It walked into your life on its own terms, and for 10,000 years, that has never stopped being true. You assume humans tamed cats the way they tamed everything else. Cows, sheep, dogs. You assume some ancient person caught a wild animal, broke its spirit, and bent it to human will. That is not what happened. Cats were never really domesticated by you. They domesticated themselves, and the evidence for that is buried in stone, in bone, and in DNA. So when did this actually start? And what were cats doing before they decided your lap was worth sitting on? Let's go back further than you think. Around 30 million years ago, the family that would eventually produce lions, tigers, and your house cat had already split off on its own evolutionary branch. That is the order Carnivora, splitting into the cat-like lineage. Long before any human walked upright, before fire, before language, cats already existed as fierce, solitary, highly efficient predators. For almost all of that time, no version of a cat had anything to do with people. Early humans and wild cats crossed paths constantly, but as rivals, not companions. A wildcat in the African savanna or the forests of the Near East was a small, aggressive hunter that avoided humans and competed with them for the same prey: rodents, birds, small game. That relationship started to change roughly 10,000 years ago, and it had almost nothing to do with affection. It had to do with grain. Before that shift, picture what a wildcat's life actually looked like. Solitary, territorial, active mostly at dawn and dusk, when small prey moved and larger predators didn't. A single wildcat needed a hunting range covering miles, because mice and birds alone don't provide much energy per catch. Humans, meanwhile, were living a very different kind of life. For most of human history, going back roughly 300,000 years, people moved in small nomadic groups, following game and seasonal plants. They didn't stay anywhere long enough to build a lasting relationship with any single wild animal, let alone a notoriously independent one like a cat. That changes the moment people stop moving. When humans in the Fertile Crescent, the region spanning modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, began farming wheat and barley, they did something no human had ever done at scale before. They stored food in one place. Stored grain attracts rodents. Rodents attract predators. And one predator in particular, the African wildcat, Felis sylvestris libica, found something irresistible about human settlements: an endless, concentrated buffet of mice. This is the moment everything changed, and it is backed by real science, not guesswork. In 2007, geneticist Carlos Driscoll led a major study published in the journal Science, analyzing DNA from hundreds of wildcats and domestic cats across the world. His findings traced nearly every house cat alive today back to a single wild ancestor. That same African wildcat from the Near East. Not multiple cat species tamed in different regions. One lineage, one origin point, spreading outward from the birthplace of agriculture itself. But genetics only tells you where cats came from. It doesn't tell you what the relationship actually looked like on the ground. For that, you need archaeology. In 2004, French archaeologist Jean-Denis and his team excavated a 9,500-year-old grave on the island of Cyprus. Inside, they found something extraordinary: a human skeleton buried deliberately alongside the skeleton of a cat, positioned carefully, facing the same direction as the person. Cyprus has no native wildcats. That means someone deliberately brought this animal across open water on a boat. Think about what that means. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a wild animal that wandered in and got tolerated. Someone valued this creature enough to transport it by sea and bury it as a companion in death. That single grave rewrote the timeline of the human-cat relationship by thousands of years. So picture the scene this evidence is pointing to. A small farming village near the Euphrates River around 9,000 years ago. Grain stored in clay-lined pits. Mice everywhere, gnawing through the harvest that determines whether the village eats through winter. A wildcat slips in at dusk, drawn by the smell and the movement. It kills a mouse, then another. The farmers notice. They don't try to drive it off because it is doing something useful, something they cannot easily do themselves. Slowly, generation after generation, the boldest, calmest wildcats, the ones least afraid of human proximity, get to stay near the food source longest. They breed. Their kittens inherit that same tolerance for humans. Nobody trained them. Nobody selected them on purpose, not at first. The cats that thrived were simply the ones that could stomach being near people. This is natural selection acting on temperament, not human design acting on an animal. That distinction matters because it's the opposite of how dogs were domesticated. And here's where the counterintuitive twist comes in, the part most people get completely wrong. Cats are barely domesticated at all, biologically speaking. A 2014 genome comparison found that domestic cat DNA is remarkably close to wildcat DNA, with far fewer of the deep genetic changes seen in dogs, who underwent thousands of years of intense human-directed breeding. Your cat's brain, instincts, and hunting behavior are almost identical to a wild predator's. That is why a house cat that has never hunted a day in its life will still stalk a feather toy with total focus. That is why it kneads with its paws like a kitten nursing. That is why it brings you a dead bird like a gift. None of that was bred into cats by humans choosing traits. It is simply leftover wild behavior, barely modified, living in your apartment. So how did cats go from tolerated mousers to worshipped icons? That part happened in Egypt, and the timeline is staggering. By roughly 3,000 years ago, cats in ancient Egypt had been elevated to sacred status, associated with the goddess Bastet, protector of the home and of childbirth. Killing a cat, even by accident, could carry serious consequences. Mummified cats have been found by the thousands in Egyptian tombs, some buried with tiny mummified mice beside them, presumably for the afterlife. From there, cats spread across the ancient world along trade and shipping routes, valued specifically for pest control on grain ships, where a rodent infestation could destroy an entire cargo. A 2017 ancient DNA study, led by geneticist Eva-Maria traced this spread directly. By analyzing genetic material from cat remains found at archaeological sites from Europe to Africa, her team showed that Egyptian cat lineages moved along Mediterranean shipping routes, and later a separate wave spread through Viking trading networks centuries afterward. Your house cat, wherever you live today, likely carries genetic threads from both of those ancient migrations. Here is the part that should genuinely surprise you. While dogs were being intensely bred for thousands of years into dozens of specialized working roles, herding, guarding, hunting, pulling sleds, cats were mostly left alone to keep doing exactly what they had always done: hunt small prey. Tolerate humans, but only on their own terms. That is the twist. The animal curled up on your couch right now is, behaviorally, almost the same animal that walked into a Mesopotamian grain store 9,000 years ago looking for mice. You didn't really tame it. You built the conditions, and it chose to stay. Compare that to a dog for a moment. Dogs were domesticated even earlier, likely more than 15,000 years ago, through a process built entirely around cooperation. Early humans and wolves hunted in similar ways, lived in similar social groups, and over thousands of years, humans actively selected wolves for traits like loyalty, trainability, and pack bonding with people instead of other dogs. The result is an animal whose entire social instinct got rewired toward humans. Cats never went through that process. There was no pack to join, no hunt to share. A cat's usefulness to early farmers was passive. It simply existed nearby, did what it already did naturally, and got tolerated for it. No one needed it to bond with them emotionally. They needed it to kill mice, and it already knew how to do that better than any human ever could. That is also why training a cat feels so different from training a dog. A dog's brain evolved over thousands of years to look to a human for direction. A cat's brain never had a reason to evolve that way. It still operates almost entirely on its original wild programming. Hunt, claim territory, conserve energy, and tolerate company only when it suits you. And that single fact explains almost everything confusing about modern cat ownership. Why your cat ignores you for hours, then suddenly demands attention on its own schedule. Why it can be affectionate one moment and aloof the next. Why, unlike a dog, it has never once looked at you like you are the center of its universe. It isn't broken. It isn't ungrateful. It is doing exactly what its ancestors did for thousands of years, staying close enough to benefit from you, while remaining independent enough to walk away whenever it wants. So the next time your cat sits 3 feet away, watching you, completely unbothered by anything you want from it, remember what you're actually looking at. You are not looking at a pet that learned to love you. You are looking at a wild animal that simply decided 9,000 years ago that your company was worth the trade.